Anglais flavored with Grand Marnier.
All right, to serve the gâteau orange, you take a Grand Marnier flavored Anglais sauce and put it on your plate. Probably about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces. Take a slice of the cake. Center it on the sauce. I use a vanilla flavored chantilly sauce cream. And I'll take a few raspberries. You can use any kind of fresh fruit that you like that's in season. Some raspberries and maybe some blueberries. A sprig of fresh mint. A wedge of an orange. And maybe an orange curl. There you have the gâteau orange.
Welcome to Great Chefs, a culinary tour of the United States featuring some of the country's finest chefs.
This time, the appetizer is prepared at Magnolia's restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. Chef Donald Barrickman puts together a simple oyster stew with fresh chives. For the entree, Chef Frank Stitt in Birmingham offers a good example of his inventive style with tuna and an upscale version of the Low Country rice dish, perlou. For the dessert, French chef Pascal Dumarie demonstrates proper folding technique with a multifaceted creation encased in ladyfingers. It's a pear charlotte. Donald Barrickman, executive chef at Magnolia's in historic district Charleston, was born in Charleston, West Virginia. He says, "I've lived in Charleston all my life, but I've only been here 11 years. Of course, for Charlestonians living anywhere else, it is a contretemps. The first course is oyster stew. Fresh oysters are shucked."
It's really important when you're shucking the oysters to try to keep your knife close to the shell so you don't slice right through the oyster. You just want to melt the butter. You don't want to brown it. You don't want the milk solids to caramelize. Adds a good rich flavor to the oyster stew itself. We use a tablespoon of minced celery, tablespoon of minced onion, and about half a teaspoon of fresh chives that are cut fine. Just sweat those again in the pan, just until the vegetables are translucent. Again, medium heat, you don't want to have any coloration from the butter or caramelizing the vegetables. And we're going to add our oysters drained of their liquid. About a quarter teaspoon, couple drops of Worcestershire. A pinch of fresh cracked pepper. And a cup of half and half. Now you just want to bring this up slowly to temperature. You really don't want to boil because the proteins from the oysters, as the juice seeps out of the oysters, I find that if you bring it to a boil, those proteins cook and coagulate, and it kind of makes for a grainy stew. And I find that if you just heat it just below the boil, you'll have a very silky, smooth oyster stew. Just a touch of salt to season. Just till the oysters are lightly curled. Then you can garnish with a little more fresh, just a touch of fresh chives on top. And bring it up. There we have Magnolia's oyster stew.
Frank Stitt's two Birmingham restaurants, Highlands Bar and Grill and Bottega, are hot tickets. Chef Stitt is personable, smart, and adroit at fusing classical technique and principles with Southern cookery. Consider his entree, grilled tuna with crawfish purloo using basmati rice.
The first dish we're going to do today is it's a purloo. A purloo is a rice dish that is originally from the low country of Carolinas, and it could be made with anything. In this case, we're going to use some of my favorite ingredients. We're going to use some crawfish, and we're going to cook that with the rice and make a little stew of that. And then we're going to sear some tuna and serve the tuna on top of this crawfish rice, this purloo, with a little bit of a watercress essence. Some beautiful watercress. Watercress is available all year long, but it's especially nice right now in the spring. It's something that I used to gather some out in the clear springs out in the country. So what I have is some salted water. It's at a hard boil.
Blanch for about 30 seconds.
Then we're going to immerse it in ice water. So we call this blanching and shocking. We do this with most of our vegetables. And this sets the color, stops it from overcooking.
It is drained by both hand squeezing and also in a towel.
And then I'm going to get a little bit more of the water out of there. Put it in a kitchen towel. And we can just squeeze it dry. And Then we're going to puree this. And this can be done either in a food processor, a robo-coupe, or a blender. We're going to use a little combination of chicken stock. Keeps it fairly light and healthy. And a little extra virgin olive oil.
The mixture is strained and held until service.
We can reserve this for when we're ready to go.
Chopped scallion, celery, carrot, and onion are softened in olive oil for the rice purloo.
We're going to add 2 or 3 bay leaves, a little pinch of chili pepper.
Chopped garlic and some other ingredients are added before the basmati rice goes in.
I'm going to season that with a little salt right now. Also going to throw in just a couple of crawfish, a few crawfish tails, a little sprig of celery. Coat this with a little bit of the oil that's in the pan and just get everything stirred around and the flavors kind of coming together.
Chicken stock is added, the heat is lowered. Cover the pan and cook for 18 minutes until the liquid is absorbed.
So we've got this going at a nice little simmer. We're going to add a sprig of thyme, maybe a little fresh chopped thyme. And then cover.
Sushi-grade tuna is seasoned with salt and pepper before searing. Olive oil is in the cast iron pan.
So you want the pan to be very, very hot to begin with. We're going to get a good sear, a good crust, but we're going to leave the inside very rare. I'm going to turn the heat, just adjust it down a little bit. It's going to take about 2-3 minutes on the side, depending on the thickness. Now I would say this is about 1.5 inches or so. You want it at least that thick so that you can cook it rare on the inside.
The cooked tuna will rest on a wire rack.
Now one little trick that we do that I think is very important is that whenever we grill or sear almost any meats, we let it rest on a cooling rack, a cake rack. And what happens is that this allows plenty of air to move around, and since there's very little contact with the meat, very little of the juices come out. And so this way all of the juices stay in.
Finely cooked crawfish are combined with chopped shallot, garlic, and green onion. This mixture will be added to the rice.
Now then, you don't have to do this, but we're going to just work in just a little bit of butter. Salt, a little bit more cayenne, Oh, yeah. And now, for a little bit of our watercress essence. And perhaps, just to remind you of what we've got, is a little watercress and a crawfish. And that is our seared tuna with a crawfish purloo with a watercress essence.
At the time of taping, executive pastry chef Pascal Dumery was at the Hotel Sofitel in Minneapolis. He was born in northern France and got early training in Belgium. Watching him work amounts to a master class in pastry technique, to wit, this beautiful creation, a pear charlotte. The ladyfinger batter contains sweetened egg whites as well as egg yolks, which also contain sugar. There are 3½ ounces of sugar total, 1/4 of which go into the egg whites and 3/4 go into the yolks. The yolks are whisked until pale yellow.
Now I wet my yolk.
Three and a half ounces of sifted flour will be added to the batter.
I put the flour on the eggs. And I flop very slowly.
This is not mixed completely until the egg whites are added.
Egg white, and you mix. You flop very slowly. When you mix your egg white, never too much, very, very slow. And if your mix there are a little bit egg white, you can keep no problem.
The ladyfingers are piped onto a parchment-lined sheet pan. Powdered sugar is sifted onto the ladyfingers. They will rest 10 minutes, then be coated again. Meanwhile, discs are piped and will become the bottom and middle layer of the charlotte. Note that the chef is free-handing these discs. The charlotte will be assembled in a ring mold. After baking, the chef will simply trim the dark edges and they will fit perfectly into the mold. Bake at 350 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes or until very light brown. The ladyfingers get another sprinkle of powdered sugar.
You can bake with one time, but it's very better if you put 2 times of sugar in top.
These also bake for 10 to 15 minutes in a 350-degree oven. The base for a mousse-like filling is pureed pear. Also gelatin leaves, which are softened in cold water. Dry, unflavored gelatin can substitute. Some of the pear puree is mixed with sugar in a small saucepan. It will go over heat and will be used to melt the gelatin leaves. The chef tests the temperature before adding the gelatin leaves.
Now the gelatin are enough. I squeeze. And you put on your pan with your mix. On your leftover confit.
The gelatin mixture is then poured into the rest of the puree.
And you stir a little bit.
After the baked ladyfingers are cooled, the chef trims them and cuts them in half. He's using this one as a guide. They go into the ring mold, top side facing out. Now the bottom, which was formed freehand, is trimmed freehand. Note the fit.
And you put your ring and you put inside.
The pastry is soaked with a combination of simple syrup and pear brandy.
You take one brush and you moisten the bottom, not the baby finger, because the baby finger is always very moist. And if you make the good baby finger, you don't need.
Then the pear mixture, which was flavored with pear brandy, is combined with whipped cream.
Slowly.
Some of the whipped cream had already been whisked into the pear mixture.
Now I take the pear mixture, I put very flat. I take my resins, is the resin I make yesterday, and you put a little bit.
The raisins were also flavored with the pear brandy. The second disc is added, the procedure repeated, and sliced glazed pears go on top.
You put on your knife and you push.
Welcome to Great Chefs, a culinary tour of the United States featuring some of the country's finest chefs.
From New Orleans, the first course is cooked by Frank Brightson. It features salty Louisiana oysters and a homemade version of Italian sausage brought together in a gratin. The entree is prepared by Don Yamauchi, who at taping time was chef de cuisine at Carlos in Highland Park, a Chicago suburb. He offers a rabbit and foie gras Napoleon. Dessert comes from Jamie Adams in Atlanta. It's the Italian classic panna cotta, which he teams with the family classic, his mother's pecan cookies. Frank Brightson's namesake restaurant's fame was earned, as they say, the old-fashioned way. He cooks the line in a small kitchen every night, personally deals with vendors, and even handwrites the daily menu. With prodigious cooking talent, he elevates Creole Acadian cuisine like this oyster gratin.
And we're going to start by making our topping. We take some grated Italian Parmesan cheese, some finely grated French breadcrumbs, and melted butter. This is unsalted butter. And this is hot Hungarian paprika, which will give it a little bit of spice and a nice color. We're going to mix that up. And this will go on top of our oysters at the end. Okay? Now we're going to make our Italian sausage here. You could use store-bought sausage or from your local butcher, but it's relatively easy to make. We're going to start with some olive oil. You can use extra virgin, but in cooking you really don't need that. You can use just regular pure olive oil. And we're going to use fresh ground pork today, which is my preference. You can also use ground beef, or you could use a combination if you like. And we're going to start this in low heat so that the pork browns nice and slowly. And when you go to your butcher, you usually have a choice of hot or sweet Italian sausage, the hot being made with red pepper and the sweet being made with fennel or anise. We're going to do a combination today. We're going to do hot and sweet using crushed red pepper flakes and also some whole anise seeds, which is my preference. This is one of those unusual dishes where you're using a combination of meat and seafood, but I find that the seasonings that are in the Italian sausage really complement the salty, flinty taste of the oysters. It's a nice combination. This is ground pork loin, which is pretty lean. You can also use pork butt or something with a little more fat to it. Once your pork starts to brown a little bit, we're going to raise the heat, and we're going to add some diced yellow onion. this is a rather small batch of sausage, so it's going to be a relatively short cooking time. So you want to get your seasonings in fairly early in the cooking process. So we're going to add some minced fresh garlic, salt, the crushed red pepper flakes, keep that stirring. And now the main seasoning, which is the whole anise seeds. We're going to add some oregano. I'm using dried here. You can use fresh. You can already smell the anise seeds starting to release their flavors. Being a dry spice, it's good to get that strong bottom heat on the bottom to wake up the flavors a little bit. Now you can see the meat is completely browned and the onions are starting to get a little soft and starting to turn clear. So what we're going to do is reduce our heat to low and let the sausage mixture simmer for a few minutes.
Now fresh oysters are shucked.
We're going to put the shucked oysters into a strainer so that we reserve some of the oyster liquor or liquid that comes with the shucked oysters. And that'll be used to flavor the dish.
The next step calls for softening chopped shallots in butter.
We'll add a little bit of our sausage mixture. Fresh spinach leaves. Just want to wilt the leaves a little bit. And then we're going to remove the skillet from the heat and add our B&B liqueur. Flame it. We'll add our shucked oysters. And you'll notice I made these oysters last because we don't want to overcook the oysters. Just lightly saute them. Add a little bit of our oyster liquor to make a sauce. Bring that to a boil. And just a teaspoon of butter to make a sauce. And finally, some shredded Romano cheese, which gives it a nice texture and flavor. And now they're ready to go into our shells. And then an oyster. And then we'll top the oysters with our cheese and breadcrumb mixture, which will give it a nice little crunch once we go into the broiler. Okay, the oysters come out of the broiler, nice and brown on top. Put them onto our presentation plate. Ready to serve.
Don Yamauchi is a Chicago native who became interested in cooking early on. Indeed, from 5th grade, he took home economics, which could be a perilous endeavor for a young man. Fortunately, he would also become a black belt in karate, keeping teasing under control. Here is a rabbit foie gras Napoleon. Chopped shallots and garlic are softened in olive oil to begin the dish.
I'm going to add shiitake mushrooms and chanterelles. I'm going to season with salt and pepper. I'm going to add a little demi-glaze.
This is duck demi-glace, but any kind will do.
We're going to set this aside. Same time we're going to cook the rabbit.
The rabbit loin is seasoned with salt and pepper and goes into hot olive oil.
I'm also going to cook the foie gras.
Because of the high fat content of the foie gras, no oil is used for sautéing. The foie gras cooks very quickly and is drained on a towel. Garnish, diced tomato and cooked fresh peas are warmed in a little of the demi-glace. The wild mushrooms begin presentation. A Napoleon is layered using thin-sliced, deep-fried potatoes. Veni Vidi Vici is an upscale Italian restaurant in Atlanta. It's owned by the Buckhead Life Restaurant Group, and the executive chef there is Jamie Adams. A native of Atlanta, he was an English major in college, then spent considerable time in Italy cooking. He reveals the experience with panna cotta.
This is a very, very simple but very, very delicious traditional Piemontese dish called panna cotta, which just means cooked cream, and it's simply that. It's cooked cream with a little bit of gelatin leaves, vanilla bean, rum, sugar. Very simple, but as you'll see in a few minutes, it can be a very elegant dessert. Very simply done. We start out with heavy cream, milk, and sugar. We'll bring this to a boil. To melt the sugar. Let it simmer for just a moment. In the meantime, we'll slice our vanilla bean and allow that to steep in with the cream as well. And I have softened here, as I mentioned, 4 leaves of gelatin, and you need to only do this 20 minutes or so before preparing the dish. Gelatin leaves come up with a much more subtle and supple texture in the final product. The other gelatins can tend to get very gummy and rubbery. That's why I prefer the gelatin leaves. Okay. We'll stir it around a little bit to help shake the vanilla bean around and let it steep the cream. We're about to come up to a boil here. And as such, we'll add the gelatin leaves. Let their water drain out of them. Let too much more liquid get in there, it'll change the balance of the gelatin to liquid. Okay. Once we put the gelatin leaf in, we'll remove it from the heat and allow that to just steep for a moment.
Granulated sugar is poured into a sauté pan and will be caramelized.
Right into the pan.
The caramel will be poured into the bottom of oven-proof ramekins.
Now I've taken with this dish a traditional Italian dessert, which I'm going to combine with my mother's old pecan cookie recipe from New Orleans, where she's from. Combine the two classics and come up with something new.
The sugar has caramelized and the chef stirs continuously.
You want it to be a nice deep golden brown. You don't want to get it too black. It gets very bitter and unpleasant. You want to be sure that all the little granules are dissolved. Okay, and now we're ready to go into the ramekin. Very careful with this so it behaves in a dangerous manner. You can't let it get on yourself at all. It'll burn you very badly. Okay, just cover the bottom of the ramekins like so. And I have done a little bit more sugar than I needed. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to combine This is my pecan brittle that we're going to use. I've just simply poured pecans into the pan and poured them out and let them cool. Now at this point, we can't forget to add our white rum to the mixture. I want to extract bean. At this point, we'll pour the cream directly into the ramekin, right over the sugar. Fill it up to the very top. And we're going to allow that to cool.
The baked pecan cookie is cut for presentation.
Press down with the other. Very gently. We'll just allow that to cool. Panna cotta. I'm going to swirl this over the flame for just a second. Turn this over on the plate. Voila. Panna cotta. Let some of the caramelized sugar drip out. So, and here I have prepared one of our cookie rings. I'm going to take just little pieces of our crocante and place them on top, around. Just little pieces that go very well with the flavors in there. This is a dessert also that needs no sauce. Mint leaf. There we go.
Welcome to Great Chefs, a culinary tour of the United States featuring some of the country's finest chefs.
Today, the appetizer is cooked at the Kiowa Island Club by Executive Chef Frank Caputo. It features Gulf seafood, shrimp and crawfish, in puff pastry. The entree is done by Corey Schreiber in Portland, Oregon. The centerpiece is local quail, browned on top of the stove, then roasted and served with wilted spinach. Finally, from Barrington, Illinois, Chef Richard Rivera creates what he calls an opera torte. It contains chocolate mousse, coffee buttercream, and chocolate sponge cake. Both of Frank Caputo's parents were born in southern Italy and instilled a love for that lusty cuisine and great wine in their son. After an associate degree at the CIA, he worked in 5 restaurants in 5 years. Not unusual for a young chef. Here is bouchée of shrimp and crawfish. The bouchée will be fashioned out of discs cut from a sheet of puff pastry. The bouchée is lightly egg washed and will be refrigerated for 15 minutes before baking. The pastry is baked with a homemade rack arrangement.
This rack here helps it raise evenly.
Bake at 450 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes.
And when we bake it,
the dish includes poached white asparagus and morel mushrooms.
the morels, you need to trim the stem. These morels are actually the very, very first of the season. They're from California. And they don't have that quite woodsy, hugely morel flavor that they would have as spring goes on. So they're a good quality, but once again, they're the first of the season. We're just going to wash them twice to remove any sand, dirt, and there aren't any, or we're hoping that there aren't any little critters in there just yet. We're just going to lightly poach the asparagus, 3 to 4 minutes. We're poaching this in the in a fish stock, flavored with the shells from the crayfish thyme, and with the addition of from the poaching of the asparagus and the poaching of the morels, we're going to introduce all these flavors right into the dish, and pulling them all together. Once your asparagus are done, you remove them. You add a slight touch of the wine that you're going to feature in the dish. Allow the liquid to come back to a boil. And then poach your morels. They take approximately around the same time as the asparagus do to cook.
The chef now prepares the seafood. Shallots are softened in butter.
Our shrimp. Our shrimp take slightly longer to cook, so we start them before the crayfish. Add our crayfish. We're going to deglaze the pan. with a liquid called verjus, which means a green grape juice, to give it a little bit of acid. Let that reduce slightly. Once our seafood is fully cooked, we'll remove it. Add our montrachet. Let it reduce slightly. Then add some of our poaching liquid that we poached the morels and the asparagus in.
Let this further reduce. Meanwhile, the top of the bottom layer is removed from the finished bouchée.
Once our sauce is ready, we add our seafood, our morels and asparagus, just to warm them through. Season with a little salt and white pepper. And fill the bouchée.
The sauce is finished.
Add our cream. Let it reduce slightly. And we sauce.
Chervil completes presentation. Wildwood Restaurant in Portland features the no-frills American renditions of Corey Schreiber. He has impressive credits, having worked with Lydia Shire in Boston, Gordon Sinclair in Chicago, and Bradley Ogden in the San Francisco area. His entree is Columbia River Farm quail with cider.
What I have here for the Columbia River Farms quail, which is a locally grown quail, going with a cider brown butter and sage. First step in this dish is to reduce cider. This is a hard cider here, or you can just use a regular apple cider out of a jar. Got about a cup of cider that's going to come down to about 2 tablespoons. It's reduced to a glaze. You'll notice the color darkens a little bit as it goes down, and the sugar concentrates. Tuck the wings back on the quail a little bit. Season it with some salt and pepper. I have a small saute pan over here with just about a tablespoon of olive oil in it. I'm going to brown the breast side first and then flip it back over on this side to finish roasting it in the oven. Got a Granny Smith apple. I'm going to cut into some small matchstick pieces as a garniture.
The grease is poured off and the pan is put into a 350-degree oven for 12 to 15 minutes. In one pan, the chef begins the sauce with melted butter. In the other pan, spinach will be wilted.
I'm going to start that out at high heat